My name does not matter to the part of this story that matters. What matters is that on a windy August morning in 1884, I stepped off a Concord stagecoach onto a wooden boardwalk in a town no bigger than my hand, with 3 small boys behind me, and a single Saratoga trunk at my feet, and a man I had never seen before walked the entire length of an empty platform to meet us. And when the church matrons on the saloon porch began to whisper that the deal was off, he said one sentence that changed the shape of every day I have lived since. He said, "Then we need a bigger table." I am writing this down a year and 3 months later, by the light of a kerosene lamp at that very table. And I am writing it because I promised my sister, the night I buried her, that if a single kindness ever came to the 4 of us, I would tell the truth of it from beginning to end, and I would not leave anything important out. So I will start where it began. I will start in Cheyenne. I will start at the cemetery. The graves had been dug side by side, and the dirt that came out of them was still raw on the August grass. They put my sister Greta on the left and her husband Albert on the right, and they laid them down within an hour of each other on the 17th of July, 1884, in the city cemetery at the edge of Cheyenne, Wyoming territory, with the wind coming down off the plains hot and dry and smelling of sage. The typhoid had taken them in 5 days. It had taken Albert first, on the Sunday, and Greta on the Wednesday, and the 3 boys, Henry who was 9, and Otto who was 7, and little Wilhelm who was 4 and would not let go of my hand. The 3 boys had been spared because Greta had sent them to me at the schoolhouse the moment Albert took ill. And I had bedded them down on quilts on the schoolroom floor and not let them step a foot back inside that house until the doctor signed the papers. The boys did not see their parents die. They saw the doctor come out of the front door with his head bent and his bag in his hand. And they saw me walk across the yard and kneel down on the dust in my black mourning dress and gather all 3 of them into me at once. And that was how they learned. I had told myself, on the walk over, that I would say the words plain and that I would not weep because Greta had asked me on the Tuesday, the last day she was lucid, to be the one to tell them, and to tell them in such a way that they would remember a steady voice and not a broken one. I kept that promise. I knelt in the dust, and I held all 3 of them, and I said, "Your mama and your papa have gone to heaven together, and they will not be coming back. And I am here, and I will not be going anywhere, and we are going to manage this." Henry stood very straight in my arms and did not make a sound. Otto pressed his face into my shoulder and shook. Wilhelm did not seem to understand. He kept asking, "When will Mama come back?" And I kept saying, "My darling, she will not, she will not, she will not," until he stopped asking and only held my skirt in both fists. I was 25 years old that July. I had been a widow myself for 2 years already. My husband Friedrich, a young brakeman on the Union Pacific, had been crushed between 2 cars in the Cheyenne yard in November of 1882, 3 months after our wedding, before there was ever a child between us. And I had buried him in the same cemetery on the same hill, 2 rows over from where they were now digging for Greta and Albert. I had taken the schoolteacher's position at the 2nd Ward School the spring after Friedrich died, because the salary was $38 a month and the back room of the schoolhouse was mine to live in for free, and because filling my days with 31 children of other people had been, for 2 years, the only way I knew to keep from drowning. I had not expected to have to fill my house as well as my days. I had not expected to be told by the probate clerk on the 5th of August that Albert and Greta had left no will, that the cottage on Eddy Street was mortgaged for more than its worth, that the bank would take it before the snow flew, and that the only thing left to me as guardian of my sister's 3 sons was the contents of a single Saratoga trunk and the $19.40 that had been in Albert's wallet on the day he took ill. $19. 3 boys. 1 trunk. The school teacher's salary would not stretch to feed 4 mouths through a Wyoming winter. The trustees of the school had already informed me, very gently, that a widow with 3 small wards could not be permitted to remain in the back room of the schoolhouse past the autumn term because it was not a fit arrangement, and because the parents of my pupils had begun to ask. They were not unkind men, they were practical men. The world was practical, and I was, by the morning of the 8th of August, 1884, a woman who needed to be practical too. I had read the advertisement on a Tuesday. It was 1 line in the back column of the Cheyenne Daily Leader, in among the want notices for cooks and laundresses and teamsters. It said only this: wanted, a respectable woman of good character to keep house for a settled rancher, Wind River Country, west of South Pass. Reply Box 14, Camp Hollow Stage. There was no name, there was no description, there was no promise of marriage, in fact, though the words to keep house for a settled rancher were the words used in that country and that year for a mail order arrangement. And I was 25, and I had been a wife, and I knew what was meant. I cut the advertisement out of the paper with the scissors from my schoolroom desk, and I pinned it to the inside front cover of my prayer book. And I did not write to Box 14 for 9 days. I read the line every morning and every night. I prayed about it on my knees by the cot in the back room of the schoolhouse. I asked Greta, in the quiet of the small hours, what she would have me do. I did not get an answer in words, but I got one in the shape of Wilhelm's small hand on my throat in the dark, finding me in his sleep the way a kitten finds a warm stone. I wrote to Box 14 on a Thursday. I wrote a short, honest letter. I said I was 25 years old, widowed 2 years, school teacher, of German descent, fair-complected, of plain habit and steady temper. I said I was sole guardian of my late sister's 3 boys, ages 9, 7, and 4, and that any arrangement that might suit the gentleman would have to suit them as well, because I would not be parted from them. I said I had $19 and 1 trunk, and no further prospects. I said if the gentleman wished to consider me on those terms, I would take the stage west on whatever date he named. I signed it with my Christian name and my dead husband's surname. I posted it before I could change my mind. The reply came back 9 days later, on the morning of the 26th of August. It was written on the inside of a folded brown paper that had been the wrapper around a packet of nails, in pencil, in a hand that was square and slow and had no flourish in it. It said, only this: Ma'am, take the stage out of Rock Springs on the 4th of September. Camp Hollow, end of the line, 4 days. Bring the boys. I will be on the platform. There will be a place. J. There was no other word, no promise, no apology, no description of himself, no description of his country. Bring the boys. I will be on the platform. There will be a place. I read it through 3 times in the hallway of the post office before I put it in my reticule. And I went home to the schoolroom, and I sat down at my desk, and I wept once, hard and quiet, with my hand pressed to my mouth, so the boys in the back room would not hear, because for the first time in 3 weeks, somebody in the world had said, in writing, the word boys, and had not flinched. I will tell you now, because it matters later, what we packed into that single Saratoga trunk and what we left behind. I packed for the boys first. Henry's 2 cotton shirts and the brown wool short coat that had been Albert's when Albert was a child, and that Greta had put away in tissue for her firstborn. Otto's blue wool jacket and his 2 shirts and the little wooden horse with the leather ear that he slept with. Wilhelm's gray wool short coat and his 2 shirts and the rag rabbit Greta had stitched for him the winter he was born, and that had been mended at the throat 11 times. 1 pair of dark trousers each, 1 pair of boots each, all of them scuffed, all of them with another half year of growing left in them, if I was careful. The boys' Sunday clothes, which were not Sunday clothes anymore, but morning clothes. A tin of buttons. A small wooden checkers said Albert had carved. Greta's hairbrush, with 3 of her wheat blonde hairs still in it that I could not bring myself to clean out. Greta's prayer book, Greta's wedding ring on a fine chain around my own neck under my collar where the boys would not see it and ask. For myself, I packed 2 dresses, 1 black and 1 gray, the small silver cross my mother had brought from Hessen, my own prayer book, my certificate from the Cheyenne Normal School, a packet of letters from Friedrich tied with a faded blue ribbon, and a tin of hard biscuits the German bakery on 16th Street had pressed into my hand without taking my coin. I left behind the schoolroom desk, the cot, the iron pot, the kettle, the blue water pitcher with the chipped lip, the shelf of readers, and Greta and Albert's wedding photograph in the oval frame, because the frame was glass and the trunk was already full, and I did not trust the 4-day stage road not to break it. I gave the photograph to Mrs. Bauer next door and asked her to keep it safe, and she put it in her own bureau drawer, wrapped in a clean linen, and she promised to send it on by mail when I was settled. I have it now. It sits on the cabin mantel between 2 pine cones. I am ahead of myself. I will go back to the trunk. We took the morning train out of Cheyenne on the 2nd of September, and we slept that night on a bench in the depot at Rock Springs, and we boarded the Camp Hollow stage at 6 in the morning on the 4th, exactly as the brown paper letter had instructed. The stage was a Concord, painted a faded red that had once been bright, with 4 horses and a driver named Kettering, who had a gray mustache and a kind manner with children. He took one look at the 4 of us on the platform, me in my faded black, the trunk at my feet, Wilhelm asleep on my shoulder, Henry and Otto holding the trunk strap each, and he tipped his hat and he said, "Ma'am, you'll be the school teacher headed up to Camp Hollow." And I said yes, and he said, "Well, we'll get you there." And he lifted Wilhelm out of my arms and set him on the bench inside as gently as a man sets down a kettle that he does not want to spill, and he lashed the trunk to the boot himself, and that one small kindness from Mr. Kettering at 6 o'clock on a September morning is the reason I was still composed enough to sit upright on the bench when the stage rolled out of Rock Springs at the 1:30. The 4-day stage journey is its own story, and I will not tell all of it here because the part that matters is the platform at the end of it. But I will tell you this. The country between Rock Springs and Camp Hollow does not look like the country anywhere else on Earth. The first day was sage flat and red rock and an enormous yellow sky. The second day we climbed, and the road got narrow, and the air got thinner, and the boys' lips went chapped, and we passed a herd of pronghorn that did not run from us because they had never been hunted by a stage. The third day we crossed South Pass at noon, and the wind on the divide was so hard it shook the coach, and Mr. Kettering had to walk the team for an hour, and Henry and Otto got out and walked beside him and helped lead the lead horse, and Henry came back to the coach with his cheeks red and his eyes bright and said, "Aunt, The man says that water on the far side runs to the Pacific. Can it be true? And I said, yes, my darling, it can. The fourth morning, the road dropped down into pine timber. Real pine. The first pine I had seen since New York. And the smell of it through the coach window was so green and so cold and so unlike anything Cheyenne had ever smelled that I cried again, quietly, into Wilhelm's hair while he slept, because the smell of pine had been the smell of my childhood in the Black Forest, before my mother and father brought us across, and I had not known until that morning that I had been hungry for it. We climbed all of the fourth day. The road wound up and up. We passed 2 cabins in clearings, and a sawmill, and a man with a string of mules, and at 10:15 on the morning of the 8th of September, 1884, the Concord rolled out of the timber and onto a wide flat shelf of mountain meadow, with a small wooden boardwalk and a false front building no bigger than my Cheyenne schoolroom. And Mr. Kettering pulled the team up and called down through the trapdoor, "Ma'am, this is Camp Hollow, end of the line. I want to tell you what I saw when he opened the door of the coach, because I have gone over it in my head 1,000 times since, and the order of seeing matters. I saw first the boardwalk. It was perhaps 40 feet long, weathered gray, with a single hitching rail. Beyond it ran a single dusty street with maybe 6 buildings, a saloon, a dry goods, a smith, a small Methodist chapel with a bell rope, the false front boarding house, and a livery. And then the street ran out into the meadow, and the meadow ran out into pine, and the pine ran up to the bare gray shoulders of the Wind River peaks, which rose up behind everything like a wall of cathedral. I saw, second, that there was nobody on the boardwalk. The boardwalk was empty. The platform was empty. There was a Concord stage and 4 exhausted horses and a driver and 4 travelers and a single trunk. And on the porch of the saloon, 2 doors down there, were perhaps 6 town fathers in dark wool coats and 4 church matrons in faded bonnets, all of them turned to watch us, all of them with their hands at their mouths or at their elbows, the way people stand when they have already begun to whisper. I saw, third, at the very far end of the empty boardwalk, a man. He was bare-chested. I will tell you that plain because it was the first thing I saw, and I will not pretend it was not. He was bare-chested in the September sun, and he was leaning one shoulder against the corner post of the boarding house porch, with his arms folded across his chest and his weight on one boot. And even from the length of a 40-foot boardwalk, I could see that he was tall and broad, and that the muscle of his stomach lay in a hard ridge of 6 clean blocks down the center of him, and that there was a long, pale scar that ran diagonal from his right collarbone down across the muscle of his chest and stopped at the bottom of his sternum, silver pink against deep tan. His hair was shoulder length and dark brown and tied back with a leather cord at the nape. His beard was full and dark. He had a wide-brim brown leather hat in his right hand at his side. His left hand was open and resting against the porch post. His trousers were dark brown buckskin, and his boots were knee-high brown leather, and his belt had a heavy brass buckle, and he wore no shirt at all, no waistcoat, no jacket. The wind off the high country was cold, even in September, and he stood in it as if it were nothing. He saw the coach door open. He saw me lift Wilhelm down. He saw Henry and Otto climb out behind me and stand very close at my elbow. He saw me set Wilhelm on the planks and reach back into the coach for the strap of the trunk. He saw Mr. Kettering hand the trunk down. He saw me look at him across 40 feet of empty boardwalk with my chin up and my fair face white under the faded gray-blue bonnet, and my deep gray-blue eyes wide because I was afraid, and I will not pretend I was not. He pushed off the post. He came down the steps of the boarding house porch one stride at a time, and he started to walk the length of the boardwalk toward us. And the boardwalk was not a long boardwalk by city measure, but it was a long boardwalk that morning, because every porch on the street had eyes on it. And on the saloon porch, the matrons had stopped whispering behind their hands and started whispering openly. And I could hear the words, even from where I stood. I caught the word orphans clear, and the word 3 clear, and the word agreement clear, and the words not what he asked clear. And I heard one of the men say, "Low and meant to carry. Well, Jeb, that ain't the bargain." And another say, "Son, you don't have to take that on. Send 'em back on the same coach." And a matron say, in a tighter voice, "The deal was for a wife, not a wife and a flock." He did not look at the saloon porch. He did not turn his head once. He walked the boardwalk straight, hat in his right hand at his side, left hand open at his side, and he did not hurry, and he did not slow, and his pale blue eyes were on me the whole length of those 40 feet, and his face was as calm as a man's face can be. And I will tell you that I have seen every kind of face a man can wear in 25 years of looking at men's faces, and the face he wore that morning was none of them. It was not eager. It was not reluctant. It was not curious. It was the face of a man who has already finished a piece of arithmetic in his head, and who has come to the answer, and who is now simply walking to the place where the answer needs to be put down. Wilhelm stepped behind my skirt. Henry stepped to my left elbow with the small canvas pack he had carried the whole way. Otto stepped between us with the tin lunch pail, and Otto, who had cried less than any of them in the whole of August, took a small, sharp breath in through his nose, the way a child takes a breath when he is making himself brave. I felt all 3 of them gathered against me, the way grouse chicks gather under a hen, and I did not put my hand back to push them out where the man could see them better, because I will tell you the truth. I had spent the 4-day stage journey rehearsing, in my head, the speech I would give to a stranger who looked at 3 small boys and changed his mind. I had the speech ready. The speech began, "Sir, I understand fully if the arrangement no longer suits," and ended, "The boys and I will take Mr. Kettering's coach back to Rock Springs at his next departure and trouble you for nothing further." I had the words. They were lined up in my throat in order. I did not say them because he was already too close, and because the matrons on the saloon porch were already saying them louder than I could have, and because something in his face as he came up the boardwalk made me understand that whatever he was about to do, he had decided before the coach ever rolled out of the timber, and that my speech was a speech written for a different man. He stopped at 12 feet. He took off his hat with his right hand, slow, the way a man takes off a hat in a church, and he held it against his bare chest over the long, pale scar. And he looked down at the boys first, at Henry, hard, then at Otto, kinder, then at Wilhelm peeking out from behind my skirt with both fists in the wool of it. And he gave them, each of them in turn, a small, deliberate nod, the kind of nod a man gives a man, not a child. And Henry's chin came up 1/2 an inch, the way it had not come up since July. Then he looked at me, and I will not try to describe what passed through his pale blue eyes in that one breath, because I have tried in my journal 12 times, and every word is too small. The closest I have come is this. He looked at me the way a man looks at a thing he has been waiting for, and the thing has arrived heavier than he expected, and he is not disappointed by the wait. He is only making sure he has the grip for it. Mrs. Holloway, the dressmaker's wife, had crossed the street by then. She was a thin woman in a blue calico bonnet with sharp eyes, and she had been the one whispering loudest. And she came up onto the boardwalk with her elbows out and her voice already raised. She said, "Jeb Carter, you tell this poor woman now before another minute passes. You tell her the agreement was for a wife, not a wife and 3 foundlings. You tell her plain so she can reboard that coach. The Christian thing is the honest thing." And behind her, one of the town fathers, a square-shouldered man named Pickett, who I learned later was the head of the school committee and the chairman of the Camp Hollow Building Society, said in a voice meant to carry, "Son, no man holds you to a bargain that wasn't the one made. You've a right to send them on. No shame in it. It ain't what you wrote for." The boardwalk had gone quiet behind their voices. Mr. Kettering had stopped working at the trunk strap. The 4 exhausted horses had stopped blowing. The wind off the high country had even, for one moment, stopped. He listened. That is the thing I will never get over, even now, a year on. He listened. He did not interrupt Mrs. Holloway, and he did not interrupt Mr. Pickett, and he did not look at either of them. He held his hat against his bare chest over the scar, and he looked at the boys, and he looked at me, and he listened to every word they said, all the way through, until they had said it, and there was nothing more to say. Then he set his hat back on his head, slow, and he reached down with his free hand, and he picked up the strap of my Saratoga trunk in one fist, as easy as if it were empty, and he turned his head toward Mrs. Holloway and Mr. Pickett. He turned his head, not his shoulders, and he said, in a voice that was not raised, but that carried to every porch on the street the way a low note on an organ carries, he said, "Then we need a bigger table." That was all. He did not explain. He did not bargain. He did not look back at them to see what they would say. He turned his shoulders to me, and he said, in a different voice, "Lower, just for the 4 of us, ma'am. I've a wagon at the livery. We'll be 3 hours up to the cabin. The youngest had best ride on the seat with you." He nodded down at Henry and said, "Son, there's a small water cask under the wagon bench. You'll see to it your brothers stay watered on the climb." He nodded at Otto and said, "Son, there's a sack of pears under the same bench from the orchard at South Pass. You'll see to it the youngest has one before the second crossing." Then he picked up the trunk on his shoulder as if it weighed nothing, hat brim down low, and he started off the boardwalk toward the livery, and he did not say one further word to the porch of the saloon, and he did not look back, and the 4 of us, Henry, then Otto, then me carrying Wilhelm, fell in behind him, because there was nothing else in the world to do, because a man had walked the length of an empty platform and used a single sentence to make a place where there had not been a place, and a place once made by a sentence like that is a place you walk into, and you do not look back at the porch either. I will not pretend I understood, on that boardwalk, what had been done. I understood it later. I will tell you when I understood it. I understood it on the 6th of October, 28 days after I stepped off the coach, on a gray afternoon when the first snow had dusted the meadow above the cabin, and Henry had ridden out with him before dawn to bring in the last of the coal steers, and they had not come back by dark, and I had been pacing the puncheon floor with Wilhelm on my hip, and Otto standing at the window with his nose pressed white against the glass, and the wind picking up in the chimney like a thing alive. And at 6:30, I heard the dog bark once, and the latch lifted, and the two of them came in, covered in wet snow from the crown of their hats to the soles of their boots. Henry walking on his own legs and grinning so wide his face hurt, and the man behind him with the coal steer's haunch on his shoulder, and the cold rolling off them both like steam off a bath. And the man set the haunch down on the chopping block and unwound Henry's scarf from his neck and looked at me across the cabin and said, "Ma'am, the boy worked a man's day. He'll want a man's supper." That was when I understood. It was not in the boardwalk. It was in the kitchen. It was the word boy and the word man, and the way he said them as if they had always belonged in the same sentence about the same child. I understood, standing there with Wilhelm on my hip and a pot of beans coming to the simmer on the cast-iron stove, that the sentence on the boardwalk, "Then we need a bigger table," had not been a generous sentence. Generous sentences fade. Generous sentences are kindnesses. The sentence on the boardwalk had been a building sentence. He had been telling the porch and the matrons and the town fathers and Mrs. Holloway and Mr. Pickett and the four of us and himself and God Almighty what the shape of his life was going to be from that morning forward. He had not been agreeing to a thing. He had been declaring one. Generous men send the orphans back on the next coach with a kind word and a coin. Building men go to the livery for the wagon and start working out, in their head, the timber for the new table on the 3-hour climb home. He had already, by the time he picked up the trunk strap, been working out the timber. I am almost sure of it. I am ahead of myself again. Let me come back down to the boardwalk. Let me come back to the wagon at the livery and the 3-hour climb and the cabin at the end of it. He did not speak much on the climb. He did not need to. He drove the wagon with his bare back and his bare shoulders to the wind off the divide, and he did not put on a coat. And Otto, after the second mile, climbed out of the wagon bed and up onto the bench beside him, and the man let him and gave the off rein into Otto's small fist for a 1/4 mile, and Otto's mouth came open in such serious concentration that I had to turn my head away, because I had not seen Otto wear that face since the Sunday before Albert took ill. Wilhelm slept on my shoulder the whole climb. Henry sat in the wagon bed with the trunk and watched the country come around us, and did not ask one question, because Henry was 9 years old, and Henry had learned in the 2 months since the typhoid that there were times in a life when you stopped asking and only watched. We crossed 3 creeks. We climbed 2 switchbacks. We passed a stand of aspen already half yellow. The light got long and gold. The pine smell got deeper. At 1:45 in the afternoon, the wagon rolled out of a stand of lodgepole into a small clearing on the south face of a ridge, and the clearing held a hand-notched log cabin with a sod roof and a single stone chimney already going thin gray, and a small barn beyond, and a pole corral with 2 horses, and a mountain creek running silver behind the barn, and the late sun on all of it the color of butter, and the man pulled up the team and said, "Plain, this is the place. You go on in, ma'am. The latch is high, but the boys can reach it on a chair." I climbed down with Wilhelm. I walked to the door. I lifted the latch. I stepped through. The cabin was 2 rooms, a main room with a stone hearth on the south wall, a cast-iron stove on the west, a built-in puncheon kitchen counter with a tin basin, and at the center of the room, a small pine table for 2. A small pine table, 2 chairs. He had built it the year before for the wife he had written for. It had been planned and pegged with care. It seated 2 adults across from each other. It would seat, if you crowded the corners, 3. It would not seat 5. He did not point at the table when I came in. He came in behind me with the trunk on his shoulder, and he set the trunk down by the bedroom door, and he looked at the small pine table with the eye of a man already measuring it for the saw. He said, "Plain, ma'am, that one'll do for tonight and breakfast. I'll get the longer plank started in the morning." Then he said, "The bedroom is the door on the right. You and the youngest take it. The older two will sleep on the truckle by the hearth tonight. I'll bunk in the barn on the hay until I can split a fourth room out of the back of the bedroom for the youngest. Give me a fortnight on that." Then he went out to unhitch the team. I want to write down, plain, what he did over the 6 months that followed, because I am afraid that if I do not write it down plain, it will turn, in my memory, into something soft and sentimental. And what he did was not soft. What he did was hard, square, deliberate work, and it was done day after day without one word about the original advertisement, or the original arrangement, or the original bargain, and the absence of those words was the largest part of the gift. He did not ever mention the advertisement, not once, not on the boardwalk, not in the wagon, not in the cabin that first night, not at breakfast, not on the morning when he drove the team down to the sawmill at South Pass to fetch 4 long pine planks for the new table and asked Henry to come along. And Henry, who had not laughed since July, came back at dusk, laughing because the millwright had given him a wedge of cheese the size of his fist and let him hold the brake on the downgrade. Not when, 2 weeks in, he split a 4th bedroom out of the south end of his own bedroom with a hand axe and a froe and a pile of fresh split shingles, working before dawn and after supper and on Sundays after church, until the small new room had a window with a wax paper pane and a built-in bunk just long enough for a 4-year-old. And Wilhelm climbed into it on the night it was finished and said, in his small, grave voice, "This is my room." And the man knelt down by the bunk and said, "Son, that's your room. That's right. That's the agreement." Not when he sat at the small pine table on the 7th evening with a stub of pencil and a piece of brown paper from the dry goods, and worked out in slow square figures what it would cost to keep 5 mouths through the winter, and slid the paper across to me without comment so I could check his arithmetic, because he had heard me say at supper that I had been a school teacher, and he had taken the word as fact and treated it as fact, and asked, without asking, for my pencil on his accounts. Not when, on a Saturday afternoon in the middle of October, he carried the 4 long pine planks out into the cabin yard and set up 2 sawhorses and a chalk line and began to plane the boards smooth 1 stroke at a time, and Henry came out and stood at his elbow and was given a small block plane and shown how to lay it flat and how to push with the grain, and Henry pushed with the grain for an hour without one word, and the man did not correct him once because Henry had been watching the angle of his hand and had matched it on the 3rd stroke. Not when, 2 Saturdays after that, Otto came out and was given the chalk line and shown how to snap a straight mark, and Otto snapped a line crooked the first time and crooked the second time and dead true the third, and the man said only, "Son, that's the line." And Otto's face went the color of a stove coal under the flush, and he carried the chalk line in his coat pocket for a week. Not when, on the 1st of November, he led a small bay pony out of the barn at first light, saddled, and called Henry out into the yard and said, "Son, this one's yours. Her name's whatever you give her. You'll feed her morning and night, and you'll learn to throw a saddle by Friday. We leave for the south pasture at sunup Saturday." Henry named the pony Greta. He did not tell the man why. The man did not ask. He saddled her himself the first 3 mornings and let Henry try on the 4th, and corrected the cinch with one finger without comment. And Henry got her saddled clean by Friday and rode out beside him on Saturday before the sun was over the ridge. He taught Otto on a sorrel pony named by Otto, Captain. He taught Wilhelm on a small gray mule named by Wilhelm, Cloud, on a lead rope the length of his own arm, walking beside the mule for an hour every afternoon for 3 weeks until Wilhelm could sit a walk and a slow trot without the lead. And then he gave Wilhelm the lead in his own small fist and walked 20 paces behind, and then 40, and then 50. And on the day in early December, when Wilhelm rode Cloud the full length of the cabin yard and back without him, the man stood at the corral fence with his bare arms folded over the top rail, and his mouth in a line that I had learned, in 3 months, was his version of a grin so large he could not let it out. And Wilhelm slid down off Cloud and ran to him, and the man caught him under the arms and lifted him up so his feet did not touch the ground, and held him there for a long second, and set him back down without saying one word, because there had been no word that would have improved on the lift. He built the table. I am going to give the table its own paragraph, because the table is at the heart of this, and because I am sitting at it as I write this, and because the table is the proof. He started the table the morning after we arrived, on the 9th of September. He cut the 4 long pine planks that Saturday at the South Pass Mill. He planed them through the rest of September. He pegged the long sides in the 2nd week of October. He set the 4 legs in the 3rd week. He planed the top in the 4th. He sanded it with river sand, wrapped in elk hide for 2 evenings in the 1st week of November. He oiled it with a rag and a small jar of linseed on a Sunday afternoon, while Henry held the jar, and Otto held the rag, and Wilhelm sat under the table with a wooden horse pretending to be the horse, and he rubbed the oil into the grain in long, slow strokes, one after the other, and the grain came up dark gold, and the knots came up like coins. And on the 11th of November, 1884, 64 days after I stepped off the Concord at Camp Hollow, he carried the small old 2-person table out of the cabin and set it up against the south wall of the barn for sawhorse work, and he carried the new long pine plank table in through the cabin door on his bare shoulder and set it down in the center of the main room in the place where the small one had stood. And he said, "Plain, ma'am, this one'll seat 6 clean and 7 if we crowd at the head. 6 clean, 7 if we crowd at the head." He had known all 64 days exactly how many places he was building. He had known on the boardwalk. He had said, "Then we need a bigger table." And he had gone home and built the bigger table with his own 2 hands, and he had built it for 6 and not 5. Because, and I am only writing this down because he said it once, in a low voice, on the evening he set it in place, when he thought I was at the stove. Because he had said to me, that first night at supper, that the small 2-person table would do for tonight and breakfast, and he had not wanted, ever again, to be the man at the head of a table that was the wrong size for the family at it. He built the new one for 6. The 7th place, the empty chair at the head, was not part of his planning. The 7th chair was mine. I added it later. I am coming to that. The town came around. I will say that plain because it is the only fair thing to say. Mrs. Holloway, the dressmaker's wife, who had crossed the boardwalk on the morning we arrived to tell him to send us back, came up the wagon road on the 3rd Saturday of September with a basket of yellow apples from her own tree and a folded length of gray calico for a school dress for Wilhelm and a stiff small note in her hand that said, "Ma'am, I spoke out of turn on the platform. I beg your pardon." Mr. Pickett, the school committee chairman who had told him plain on the boardwalk that no man held him to a bargain that wasn't made, came up the road on the second Saturday of October with two of his own school committee and a roll of slate boards and a packet of chalk and an offer that I should take over on a half-time basis at $12 a month. The small Camp Hollow school, which had been without a teacher since June. I said yes. I have taught it ever since. I teach Henry and Otto and 4 other ranch children 3 days a week, and Wilhelm and the 3-year-old Pickett twin sit on the back bench and trace letters on the slate. And I am paid $12 a month, and I put 8 of those into the household and 4 into a tin under the kitchen counter that he does not know about and will not know about until next March, when I will use it to buy him a new buckskin shirt for the spring, because the man has not, in 15 months, owned a shirt, and I have decided that this is the year that he will. The Methodist church matrons came around in their own time. The old preacher's widow, Mrs. Atwood, brought up a glass jar of plum preserves at Christmas. The blacksmith's wife brought a length of red flannel for the boys' winter union suits in January. The saloon keeper's wife, yes, the saloon keeper has a wife, and she is a tall, sober woman from Ohio who reads the Cheyenne Daily Leader 2 weeks late through the mail. Brought up, on the last day of February, a packet of seed corn from her own crib and a jar of yeast starter and a small embroidered pillowcase she had made with the words, "Bless this house" on it in red thread. There is a lesson in that, and the lesson is the lesson of the boardwalk in reverse. A town that whispers on a porch in August will, if a man uses one good sentence at the right moment, end up at the same kitchen door in February with seed corn. I have not forgotten the August whispering. I have forgiven it. There is a difference, and I have taught the boys the difference, because the difference matters, because Henry will be 12 next August, and Henry will need to know the difference when he is 25 and standing on his own boardwalk. I will tell you what he is like. I have not, in this whole long telling, told you what he is like, and that is wrong, because the man is the heart of this. He is 33 years old. He came out from western Pennsylvania at 16 on a cattle drive, and never went home, and never will. He cannot read more than the printed word on a flour sack. I have been teaching him in the evenings, slowly, by the lamp at the new table, and he has gotten as far as the first chapter of the Gospel of John, which he sounds out one word at a time with his finger under the line, and his pale blue eyes patient with himself in a way I have never seen a grown man be patient with himself before. He took the scar that runs from his right collarbone down across his chest to his sternum from a Texas longhorn steer's near horn in the spring of 1879, on a drive up the Bozeman, and he was thrown 30 feet and trampled by his own horse afterward, and lay 3 days in a sheep herder's tent before the cowhands carried him to a doctor, and the doctor told him in plain English that he was a dead man, and he did not die. He will not in any weather wear a shirt above the waist on his own ground. He says he cannot abide the feel of cloth on the scar, that the scar pulls if he is buttoned, that he sleeps better cold than tight, and he has been cold and bare-chested in his own cabin and his own yard and his own south pasture for 5 winters running, and he is not yet sick from it. He puts on a heavy wool coat for town and for church on Sundays, and only there, and the moment we are back over the cabin threshold, the coat comes off the shoulders and goes on the peg by the door, and he is bare to the waist again. The boys do not remark on it any more than they remark on the way the creek runs. It is the way he is. I have stopped remarking on it myself. I have come to think of it as a kind of honesty in him that I did not at first understand. He wears no cloth between his scar and his sky, and he wears no varnish between his word and his deed. The two go together. I would not have him button up either one. He laughs 4 times a week, and he laughs quietly, and the laugh is at the back of his throat, low. He has cried once that I have seen, on the night Wilhelm brought him a small flat stone from the creek with a fossil shell pressed into it, and said, "Plain, this one is for you, because Mama used to like the shells." The man took the stone in his palm and looked at it for a long time, and then he closed his fist around it, and he turned his head to the dark window for half a minute. And when he turned back, his pale blue eyes were wet at the edges, and he set the stone on the mantel above the fire, and he said, in a voice I had not heard him use before, "Son, that one'll be there as long as I am. The stone is on the mantel still. It is between the pine cones and Greta and Albert's wedding photograph in the oval frame that Mrs. Bauer sent on by mail in October. He has never asked in all these months for the boys to call him anything in particular. He let them choose. They chose by the end of November the word uncle. They use it without thinking now. Henry's morning, uncle. Otto's, will you cut my apple, uncle? Wilhelm's, half asleep in the dawn with his small wheat blonde curls on the pillow. Uncle, is it time for chores? He answers to it the way a man answers to the name his mother gave him. He has never said, "You may call me father." He has never said, in fact, the word father at all. I have come to believe, and I will write this down because I want it on a page, that he understands, at a depth I do not always understand, that the boys had a father, that his name was Albert, that he died in Cheyenne in July of typhoid, and that the chair of father is occupied in the boy's memory and is not his to take. He took the chair of uncle instead, which was open, and he has filled it the way a good cabinet maker fills a joint, square, plumb, and without apology. The chair of husband he took on a Sunday in early October at the small Methodist chapel in Camp Hollow at 4:30 in the afternoon, with the 3 boys lined up behind us in the front pew, and Mr. Pickett standing as witness, and Mrs. Holloway as the second, and the preacher who read the words was a circuit rider named Mr. Kell, who had ridden up from South Pass that morning, and the rings were 2 plain bands the smith at Camp Hollow had hammered out of a single Mexican silver dollar, and the man wore his heavy wool coat for the half hour of the ceremony, and took it off again on the chapel steps the moment we were out into the September wind, and he kissed me there on the steps with the coat over his forearm and the long pale scar bare to the cold sun, and the 3 boys watching from the bottom step with grave, careful faces. And I will not write down here what passed between us in that one breath, because some things belong to a marriage and not to a page. But I will tell you that I knew, between his mouth and mine, that I had stopped being afraid. That is the line I want you to remember. I had stopped being afraid. I had been afraid for 2 years before the typhoid, and 3 weeks during it, and a 4-day stage ride after it, and a 40-foot boardwalk at the end of the stage ride. I had been afraid in my sleep. I had been afraid of waking. I had been afraid of the bank and of the school trustees and of the Cheyenne winter and of my sister's empty cottage on Eddy Street and of the Saratoga trunk and of $19 and of the wind off the divide and of the matrons on the saloon porch, and of, most of all, the moment the wagon would pull up to the cabin, and the man would look at the four of us by lamplight and would change his mind. I had carried the fear in my chest the way you carry a hot stone in a coat pocket. The fear went out on the chapel steps. It has not come back. I will not pretend it could not come back. I am not a fool. I have lived 26 years, and I know that fear comes and goes the way weather comes and goes. But I will tell you that for 15 months it has not come back, and that is the longest I have gone without it since I was a girl in the Black Forest before my mother died. And I owe that to a man who walked the length of an empty platform and used 5 words in a row. The chair at the head. I told you I would come back to it. I will come back to it now, because I am close to the end of this telling, and I have not yet explained the chair. And the chair is the closing of the circle. The new table seats 6. He built it for 6. The 4-board top is 14 feet long when you measure from the heel of the chair at the head to the toe of the bench at the foot. And he set 6 places when he set it the first time on the 11th of November. The foot for himself, the place to his right for me, and the long bench down the side for the 3 boys in age order, Henry, then Otto, then Wilhelm. 6 places, 5 chairs, and 1 bench. He left the chair at the head empty. I had not asked him to. He had made 6 places and put a chair at the head and put nothing in front of it. No plate, no cup, no spoon, no napkin, only the chair, plain pine, with a low ladder back and a cane seat he had woven himself in 2 evenings from the wet inner bark of a riverside willow. The only fancy chair in the cabin. I did not understand, on the 11th of November, what the chair at the head was for. I asked him, on the 12th, at breakfast, after the boys had run down to the creek for the cream pail. I asked him, plain, why 6 places and only 5 of us? He did not look up from his coffee. He said, "Ma'am, that's your sister's chair." He said it the way a man says a thing he has thought through for a long while, and that he is now putting down because he has been waiting for the right moment to put it down, and the moment has come. He said, "Ma'am, the boys had a mama. The boys will always have had a mama. She sits at the head of this table when we sit down to eat, every meal, breakfast, dinner, and supper. And you set a place for her if you want to set one, and you don't if you don't. But the chair stays empty, and the chair is hers, and that's the agreement at this table from this day." He said it without looking up. He drank his coffee. He set the cup down. He went out to the barn to muck the stalls. I sat at the new table for a quarter of an hour without moving. Then I got up and I went to the puncheon counter and I took down the small blue china plate that had been Greta's grandmother's plate, the one plate I had wrapped in 3 layers of linen and brought across in the trunk, and I took down the small pewter spoon that had been Greta's spoon as a child, and I took down a clean white cup from the dresser shelf, and I carried the 3 of them to the head of the new table, and I set them in front of the empty chair, plate, spoon, cup, just so, the way Greta had set her own table in Cheyenne every morning of her married life. The plate has been at the head of this table at every meal for 14 months. The boys set it for her now. Henry sets the plate. Otto sets the spoon. Wilhelm carries the cup in both hands. They do it before they sit down. They do it without being told. They have done it since November, and they will do it for as long as they sit at this table. And after they have grown and left it, I will do it. And after I am gone, the next woman in this cabin will do it, because the chair is hers, and the chair will stay hers. And the agreement at this table is the agreement that he made at his coffee on the morning of the 12th of November, 1884, without looking up from his cup. I am at the table now. It is 9:15 in the evening, on the 17th of December, 1885, 15 months and 9 days since I stepped off the Concord at Camp Hollow, and the cabin is quiet because the boys are asleep. Henry is asleep on the long truckle by the hearth because he has asked, since November, to give up the bedroom to Otto and Wilhelm. Because he is 10 now and a man, and he will sleep at the hearth like a man, and he will be the first up to feed the stove. And he is. Otto is asleep in the bedroom with a wooden carved horse the man whittled for him out of cottonwood under his pillow. Wilhelm is asleep in the small 4th bedroom that was split out of the south wall, with the rag rabbit Greta stitched for him the winter he was born, and the rag rabbit is on the pillow next to his head, and his small wheat blonde curls are damp at the temples from the heat of the stove. The man is asleep on his side of the bed in the main bedroom, with one bare arm thrown across the pillow, where I will be in an hour. The wind is off the divide, and the chimney is drawing well, and the kettle is steaming low on the back of the stove, and the kerosene lamp on the new table is turned low and steady, and I am writing the last page of this telling at the place to his right, and the empty chair at the head of the table has Greta's blue china plate on it, and the pewter spoon and the white cup, all set just so. And the chair is the chair I see when I look up from the page. Look, I will say one more thing, and then I will put the pencil down. I have asked myself, in the quiet hours when the boys are asleep, and the man is asleep, and I am the only one in the cabin awake, whether the man on the boardwalk knew, when he said, "Then we need a bigger table," what he was promising. I have decided he did. I have decided he had been alone in this cabin for 4 winters, and that he had built a small 2-person table for the wife he had written for, and that he had spent the 18 days between my letter and my arrival thinking about a wife, and that he had spent the 4 days of my stage ride thinking about a wife and 3 boys, and that he had spent the morning of the 8th of September leaning against the corner post of the boarding house porch, with his arms folded across his bare chest, watching the empty road for a Concord, and thinking about a wife and 3 boys, and that by the time the Concord rolled out of the timber and onto the meadow at 10:20, he had finished the arithmetic of it in his head, and the answer he had come to was the answer he had walked the boardwalk to deliver. He had not been startled by the boys. He had been waiting for them. I am almost sure of this. I have not asked him plain. I do not need to. I will tell you why. I will tell you the small thing he did at the wagon at the livery on the 8th of September before the climb. He put the trunk in the wagon bed first. Then he reached up under the wagon bench and he pulled out a small folded piece of brown paper. And he handed it to me without comment. And he said, "Plain, ma'am, you'll want to give the youngest one of these the moment we clear the meadow." I unfolded the paper in my lap on the climb, an hour up the road, when Wilhelm had begun to fuss. Inside the paper were 3 small hard candies. 3. Not 1. Not 2. 3. He had bought 3 candies at the Camp Hollow dry goods on the morning of the 8th of September, before the Concord ever rolled in, and he had put them in the wagon under the bench, and he had told me to give the youngest one of them, and the other 2 were in my pocket for the older 2. And the dry goods proprietor's wife told me, 8 months later, over a basket of June strawberries on her porch in town, that he had walked into the store at 7:30 that morning, 8 days before I arrived, and bought 3 candies and 3 small tin cups and 3 small wool blankets and 3 pairs of boys' mittens in graduated sizes, and he had paid for them with a half-eagle gold piece, and he had said, plain, to her husband, across the counter, "Mr. Harden, I'll be needing these for the 8th. You set them aside." And her husband had said, "3 of each, Jeb." And he had said, "3 of each, Mr. Harden." 8 days. He had bought the boots 8 days before I arrived. He had not been startled by the boys on the boardwalk. He had been waiting for them. He had bought them mittens. The whispering on the saloon porch had been the whispering of people who did not know that the man had already stocked the wagon. "Then we need a bigger table." On the boardwalk was not the moment he decided. It was the moment he announced. He had decided 8 days earlier at the Camp Hollow Dry Goods, with the half-eagle on the counter and Mr. Harden's pencil over the ledger. 3 candies, 3 tin cups, 3 mittens, 3 pairs of small boots. He had read my letter. He had counted the boys. He has never told me this himself. Mr. Harden's wife told me in June, on her porch, while the strawberries cooled in the bowl between us. I have not, in turn, told him that I know. I will not. He would only shrug and say, "Ma'am, the letter said 3. He would think it was simple arithmetic. It was simple arithmetic. That is the thing about him I have spent 15 months learning. Simple arithmetic, with a man who keeps his word, is the architecture of a life. I had been afraid of the world for a long time. I am not afraid of it now. The day a man chose the 4 of us in a single sentence on a 40-foot boardwalk, with the matrons whispering behind him and the wind off the divide rising, was the day I stopped being afraid of the world. I do not say this to be poetic. I say it because it is the literal truth, and I have promised, on the night I buried my sister, that the literal truth was the thing I would set down. The pencil is going down. The lamp is going out. The man's bare arm is across the pillow in the next room, and the chair at the head of the table is set with Greta's plate, and Greta's spoon, and Greta's cup, and the 4 boards of the long pine table are oiled dark gold under the low lamp, and I am, for the first time in the 25 years of my life, exactly where I belong, and there are 6 places at the table, and 1 of them is hers, and the other 5 are ours, and the sentence on the boardwalk was the deed of it, and the table is the proof of it. And tomorrow morning at 5:30, Henry will be up first to feed the stove, because Henry is the first up at the hearth, because Henry is a man now, and the man who is asleep in the next room with his bare arm across my pillow taught him how to be one without ever once raising his voice. Amen. I'm putting the pencil down.